a question that I'm going to do away of what we were talking before. Do you know roughly how many students do you have in first and second, in the two first units you were teaching? How many students do you have today?
Yeah, so in terms of the first year students, we normally have around 1,200 students per unit. It can fluctuate. I know with COVID last year, because of restrictions, we actually had quite a few more students, more domestic students who were uncertain about what they could do, and so they came to university. But nonetheless, we have approximately 1,200, and for ACL102, at the moment, we've got about 1,150 students studying the course, and they are drawn from the Bachelor of Criminology, as well as the double degrees, so Bachelor of Crim and IT Security, Bachelor of Criminology and Psychological Sciences, Law, and so on. But it's quite it's a wonderful kind of melting pot, if you like, of different ideas, which is why I like it. But you can see that it's quite a large number of students that are all studying criminology. And I think what's really interesting to note about that is that it means that people are wanting to be critical. They're wanting to learn more about how to be critical about something that is, that can and will affect them in their lives moving forward, regardless of whether they want to be a psychologist, a lawyer, a social worker, work in research, whatever it might be.
So I remember that, I don't know if it is still the case, one of the first assignments was a reflection of what we thought the criminology was. And I ask you as a lecturer, to which extent that reflects the thought of kids studying criminology on what they think that criminology is on the basis of what they see on Netflix. The CSI effect. We have a total match. These kind of things that don't exist. But to which extent do you see this phenomenon on the cohort of students you have today?
It's interesting because I think, particularly those that are starting their degrees now, obviously those students are exposed to a much larger range of information than perhaps even you were a few years ago, and even myself, 10, 15 years ago when I was studying at university. The amount and prevalence of information that students have access to is phenomenal. But at the same time, there's been a significant shift in students' social behaviours, and so I think young people or those coming to university are watching more shows. There's more documentaries, popular culture shows, movies, and so on that all involve crime. And so you would expect that to influence students' perceptions of what the criminal justice system is. I think what's really interesting about that, though, is, and in fact, I was actually, the lecture I gave this morning was about experts and lay people and the CSI effect, which in some ways has been not debunked, but it's been critiqued by scholars. And so this idea of the CSI effect is not quite as widespread as it once initially was. But I think there is a relationship between what people see and hear and what they experience in terms of popular culture, news, and so on, and how that shapes their understanding of criminology and the criminal justice system. But I think there's a lot more opportunity for reflection on evidence-based decision-making, because I think, particularly in the last few years, I've seen a lot more true crime documentaries. And so there's been this real shift away from just fictionalized accounts of crime to, yes, we still see them, and there are still movies about murders and all sorts of different types of crimes, and the fantasy of the whodunit movie, those kinds of fictional accounts. But there's also a lot more information and podcasts such as this one that talk about true crime, which I think are really interesting because it actually says something that's more relevant and reflective of the reality of what the criminal justice system is and does in various parts of the world. So it's not such a myth anymore, and people are learning more, which is I don't know if it's a circle or if it's a chicken or the egg kind of process. But people tend to know more or expect more and ask more questions because they have a grounding based on what they're seeing and hearing in and around the media.
I think that from the beginning to the end of your career, there are places that you shift from when you start and you want the criminals in jail and throw the key away, and then you realize in the later years, oh, wait a minute, that's not the solution. And probably it's the same shift that you have as a student when you start realizing that what they're selling is not the truth, and you shift your way away from what is Netflix culture to what is a real crime, and talk or told by somebody who really know what happened and is talking to you about specific technicities that you really need to know, and they're the truth, no? I think that this is as well the shift that you do through the career when you start having a better understanding of what crime is. So,
sorry to interrupt, but I think one thing, sorry, just to follow on what you just said, I think it's really important to note that I think one of the key principles that university teaches students, and particularly Deakin's criminology program, is that this idea of truth is perhaps an unrealistic aspiration. The idea that reality is actually made up of multiple truths, and it's about your own perspective, it's about experiences, how people have different experiences of the criminal justice system is in fact one of the key things that we teach, particularly at first year when we talk about the experiences of Indigenous people in the community, the overrepresentation of certain vulnerable minority groups in the community. It's about understanding that, and this is why I think it's really important for other disciplines such as law, psychology, and so on to engage with the discipline of criminology, is that it's not as black and white or binary as a lot of people believe. And so that's why it's important to ask those questions, because it's not right and wrong, good and bad, offender and innocent. Unfortunately, fortunately, there are so many degrees of grey in the middle, and that can be quite challenging for students. But I think it's also really empowering because it allows you to engage with your environment. So whether it's being in Victoria and critiquing the Victorian criminal justice system, or looking at national issues around Black Lives Matter and the treatment of Indigenous people in custody, domestic violence and family violence issues, they give you an opportunity to ask really critical, often challenging questions, and recognising that there are multiple truths in those responses. And I think that's what's really exciting about criminology, because that's what leads to reform. Because if we just leave it as is and we take what we see and hear for granted as truth, we then don't ask why, and therefore there's no opportunity for change moving forward. And I think that's what's really great about our degree.
Yeah, it is. And that's another shift that as a student I had through the career, is this idea of them and us. The more you advance in the career, more you realize that them is us and that's it. It's not them and us and we're good and they're bad.
There's situations that may lead to crime and may not, and it depends on your experiences. It depends on your thoughts about a particular issue. It depends on your the opportunities that you have growing up compared with other people. And I think that's removing those binaries of us and them is so incredibly important. Because I feel like they constrain how students or people in the community feel about crime and criminality. Because if you don't feel that people like you can commit crime, then when they do, then you're not going to look twice. And the idea of othering and labelling is so incredibly dangerous, because not only is it more likely to lead to over-policing of particular vulnerable groups, but it also means that you're less likely to follow the evidence in front of you. And I mean that in the broader sense of the information that you look at, but also specifically the evidence in a criminal justice, criminal trial kind of way as well.
Regarding what you say, it's something really funny that always happened to me. I might have a dodgy face, but every time that I go through an airport, they throw me the dogs and they check my bags, no matter what I go. So I must be a very dodgy person, or I must look like a dodgy person, but it's super funny because my husband always makes fun of me because of that. He said, here we go again. Here we go again with you.
Which is really interesting, because even though, as you say, you're able to reflect on it relatively humorously, it does say something about the nature of the system rather than any particular feature of yourself. And so it's how we as as a community respond to different elements. And I think that's why we need to be mindful of those opportunities for, arguing for othering or for labelling, because there are reasons as to why that occurs. Whether they're positive or negative is another question, but at least it opens us up to talk about some of those issues as to why that happens, and in particular, what are the consequences of doing that? Because obviously it can be incredibly stigmatizing, can have negative connotations. It can reduce our trust and confidence in the justice system, even just from one interaction with what is arguably an authority figure. So they're the types of questions that I like. I encourage students to think about, why are some people being stopped for those random events when others are not? Because that says something about the community itself rather than anything else.
Yeah. So to finish with, if you have to talk to yourself, give me one good piece of advice you will give to yourself, and one piece of advice that you want to leave for the students to chew on.
It's a very big question. I guess for me, from my own reflection or hindsight, I think the piece of advice that I would give myself would be to keep digging, because there are times where I feel like with the knowledge that I now have, or with the experience or the experiences that I've been through, I think it's important to keep digging and be confident, knowing that even if the process is challenging or difficult, ultimately it is worth the process, and you can keep digging and keep asking, because there's always more to find, particularly with the discipline of criminology, and particularly with the value or the benefit of doing research. It's one of the features as an academic that I think is fantastic, of in terms of my vocation and my career, actually being able to ask those involved in whatever you're talking about is an incredible opportunity. So that would be my advice to myself, would be to keep digging. In terms of advice for students or for anyone in the community generally, actually, particularly if they're considering coming to university, would be to be kind with yourself. I think there's a lot of pressure placed on students to behave in a particular way and to conform to particular expectations about what learning is. And as I said earlier, I feel like that's partly a reflection of the way in which higher education is conceived of or thought of in the community. That it's this idea of a degree factory, which I think is unfair to universities. I feel like universities are a fantastic opportunity to basically challenge all of what we know, and that's a good thing. The idea that we can get to some uniform truth is unrealistic, but I think prodding and poking and asking all sorts of different questions is a really useful skill to have, regardless of whatever degree you do, whatever discipline you're in. And so my advice would be to be kind to yourself, but also follow your passions. Keep asking those questions to find out what you're most interested in, because ultimately there is something there that's probably driving your motivation to become a lawyer, to become a criminologist, to become a doctor, whatever it might be. Follow that passion, and that's what, I know it's incredibly cliche, but if you're doing something that you love, it means that you're more likely to be successful at it. You're also more likely to have the opportunity to help other people, and on a day-to-day basis, it'll be more enjoyable and make time go quicker, which I think is a positive thing sometimes. So give yourself the time and be kind to take those opportunities and listen to what you're most interested in. That would be my advice to anyone, particularly if they're coming to university. There are many paths already well trodden, and some of those things are, some of those paths are fantastic, but there are also there is a wonderful opportunity to tread your own path and follow your own goals and dreams.
Andrew, it was a real pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for this interview. I am sure that a lot of our students are going to be very benefited on this feedback we have here, and you know how much I appreciate all you give us as students, and this was just an amazing way of finishing the career. just having an interview with my first lecturer. Thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you very much, Sylvia.